We're gonna need a bigger cake with room for 250 candles. I'm Josh Spiegel, host of the podcast Lunatic in the Newsroom. Join me and my guest BJ Shea as we celebrate America's big birthday. What are the best and worst American inventions? How would the founding fathers feel about today's America? What's the most American thing? And what will America look like at 500? Join our celebration this week on Lunatic in the Newsroom.
After a brutal double homicide in rural Ohio in 2005, a killer who liked to watch the TV show CSI Crime Scene Investigation thought he cleaned up his tracks. But as we know, it's never as easy as it looks on television. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines. I have two short announcements. First, I'm going to do my best to fix it in editing. However, if you hear a little bit of background noise, my air conditioner is running. We are in an extreme heat advisory all week, and I just can't bring myself to turn it off on my family while I'm recording. So I will try to get it out using tools in editing, but if you are like, what is that shh sound? That's my air conditioner. But in more exciting news, I have in my show description all of the events I will be attending in the fall and the winter. I'm not really doing anything until then. And the first one is AdvocacyCon in New Mexico in September. And also in September, there's a retreat for podcasters and listeners to mingle together in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And then there are two international trips with my friend Josh from True Crime Bullshit. If you remember, over a year ago, we went to South America together. He has done a couple trips without me. And now I will be going on his next two, which are to Costa Rica in November, and then to a bucket list location for me, the Galapagos Islands, in January. Feel free to check out any of the links to get tickets to any of the things. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with this week's episode, and we are going to start with Wanda Rollyson and her daughter Rebecca Cliburn. There is not a ton of biographical information on either of them out there, but from what I can gather from public records, Wanda was born in July of 1935, she married her husband Aaron in February of 1956, and their daughter Rebecca was born in 1960. Wanda and Aaron raised Rebecca in Trumbull County, Ohio, and when Rebecca was a 21-year-old college student, she got married. She and her husband had children together before they divorced. In 2004, Wanda's husband Aaron died. He was 14 years older than Wanda, so it wasn't really surprising that he predeceased her, but it was obviously very difficult after 48 years of marriage. To add to Wanda's stress, she was incredibly worried about her daughter Rebecca, who was at that point pretty deep into drug addiction, and Wanda, like a lot of families, didn't know what to do about it. With Aaron's death, Wanda had the ultimate say over where any of her money was spent. And according to the television show Secrets of the Morgue that covered this case, Wanda would give money to Rebecca pretty much every day. I'm not sure if she was doing this prior to Aaron's death or to what degree, but afterwards, according to other family members, Rebecca would show up every day asking for upwards of $200. And Wanda would often, if not always, give Rebecca the money. For those who have been in this position, particularly if you were also in a vulnerable place, as I'm sure Wanda was in the aftermath of losing her husband, it is hard to say no. To look at your child, even if they are a full-grown adult, and let them suffer is awful, and it comes with a lot of guilt. It seems like we've been mostly taught that there is only one alternative to enabling someone in active addiction, and that is tough love. Just cut them off cold. And sometimes that is the best course of action, particularly if this isn't someone who is safe to have in your life. But there is another approach between enabling and tough love, and it's based on the principles of harm reduction. Back when Wanda and Rebecca were dealing with this dynamic in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the words harm reduction would make you think of community programs like needle exchange to slow the spread of HIV, or methadone clinics to help get people off opioids. But the principles can work within family units. Harm reduction first requires a radical acceptance of reality. Your loved one is using drugs, period. That is where they are in life. Now, what can you do to reduce harm within that reality? Now, giving them cash to buy drugs is not reducing harm. But maybe a bus pass that takes them to clinics, shelters, food pantries, or other harm reduction resources could help. If they're welcome to come to your house to visit or even spend the night, have Narcan on hand and know what to do in the case of an overdose. Buy them fentanyl test strips so they can reduce harm themselves. Point them to the website, harmreduction.org, for more information on safer use. Now, not every situation is going to benefit from the same approach, so I am giving examples of how the principles of harm reduction can work, but I'm not giving direct advice. Sometimes detaching with love is what you have to do. Like so many families in this position, some of whom may be listening right now, Wanda was doing the best she could with the tools she had. Addiction can grip people in ways where they will lose everything and keep going, and it's just so hard for us to understand. And Rebecca was facing losing quite a bit due to her drug use. In June of 2005, she was charged with multiple felonies, not just for drug possession, but also trafficking in cocaine. I looked up her specific charges, and they were charging this as a fourth-degree felony, meaning she was facing prison time. On top of that, Rebecca was dealing with ongoing custody issues with her 2 minor children. By 2005, her adult daughter Melissa was trying to get custody of them. By all reports, Melissa, Rebecca's daughter, and Wanda, Rebecca's mother, were very close, and I imagine they leaned on each other a lot as they watched Rebecca struggle. Wanda was also 70 years old and recently widowed and living alone out in rural Newton Township, Ohio. So Melissa was also making sure she checked in with Wanda daily, if not multiple times throughout the day. One routine call they had was the after-church call. Wanda was religious, so she attended church twice a week, Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings. When she got home from services, she would call Melissa to let her know she got home safely. So when Melissa did not get a call on the night of Wednesday, December 21st, 2005, she was concerned. She tried to reach Wanda that evening and left her some messages, and then Melissa went to work the next morning. She called Wanda as she could during the workday, but when she couldn't reach her by the time she left work, she went ahead and drove out to her house. Wanda's house was a modest 2-bedroom home with a basement, and it was sitting on 26 acres, and it had a large garage out back. So when Melissa got out to the house after work, which would have been around 5:30, she saw that the garage door was open and Wanda's car was inside, so Wanda should have been home. But no one answered the door. Melissa looked around a bit and noticed there were footprints in the snow leading up to the house that were too big to be Wanda's. So she decided to call 911 and ask for a welfare check. The police met Melissa at the house, and as they walked around the back, they saw that there was a pane of glass smashed out of the rear door. And when they stood close enough, they could smell smoke. Stepping inside, the responding officer noticed that it was dark, so he used his flashlight to make his way down to the basement. There, he saw a large pool of blood at the bottom, with what looked like drag marks through the blood, and there was a broken pair of eyeglasses. He turned around and called out to Melissa to go wait in the car. The way the basement was set up was in half. There was one side that was finished into a living room, and the other side was the utility room, and it had an oil furnace. There was blood on the living room side with drag marks towards the utility room, so the officer followed that to a pile of ashes. And in the pile of ashes, he could make out a human foot. So he also backed out and called in both crime scene investigators and also the fire department. The basement smelled like smoke and it was a bit warm, so he wanted to be 100% sure they weren't going to have a fire reignite. The firefighters were easily able to assess the scene, and they said the fire had completely burned itself out and there was nothing to worry about. That was very good news from a crime scene perspective, because then they weren't contaminating the scene with water or fire extinguisher spray. Before sorting through any of the ash pile, they did call in a forensic pathologist to help identify and collect the remains, and it was pretty obvious there were 2 victims. One body was 80% destroyed with really just limbs remaining, and on those limbs, they found a few pieces of jewelry. Showing them to Melissa, she confirmed they belonged to her grandmother, 70-year-old Wanda Rollyson. The second body had been largely destroyed from the waist down, but the torso and head were more intact, relatively speaking. Because of this, they were able to remove the victim's dentures, and they had 45-year-old Rebecca Cliburn's name on them. By investigating the rest of the scene, the police had some idea of what happened here. They did not know why Rebecca was at her mother's house, but it looked as though she had been attacked first in the basement living room. She had multiple blunt force injuries to her head, and the severity let them know that an object was used. There was also a bedsheet around Rebecca's mouth and neck that could have impeded her breathing. Some of the head wounds would have been fatal, and it's possible she also asphyxiated. After being killed, Rebecca was dragged from the TV room into the utility room. Rebecca was found without clothing, and they believed she was undressed prior to being killed. When someone is wearing clothing while being dragged through blood or mud or dirt, the clothing leaves its own impression. Whether it's a fold, a thick seam, or the hem of a shirt that rises up, it'll be obvious, and none of those were present in the drag path. However, Rebecca's lower body had been so damaged, they could not tell if she had been sexually assaulted. The second bloody drag path, the one that led to Wanda's body, went over the marks left from the killer moving Rebecca's body. So it's believed Rebecca was killed first, and possibly while Wanda wasn't even home. Wanda had gone to church that night as planned, and her pastor said she left around 8:30. We know she didn't call Melissa when she got home as usual, so it's believed she was attacked right when she got there. Wanda's cause of death could not be determined due to the fire damage, but they do think the attack started at the top of the stairs, and she was possibly thrown down into the basement because her glasses were found broken at the bottom. To further lead authorities to believe the attacker killed Rebecca and then waited for Wanda to come home, there was a cigarette butt found near the utility room, which was taken into evidence. It's possible the killer smoked to try to calm his nerves. And the investigators believed, at first, that there was only one person involved based on the shoe impressions in blood in the basement. All of the prints were consistent with a single boot-style tread, meaning we had one person walking around down there, not 2 or 3. The pathologist determined that both women were dead before the fire was started. It was difficult to check for soot because Wanda's body had been too destroyed for that, and Rebecca would have been gagged, which would have protected her airways from the smoke, even if she was alive. There is a test for carbon monoxide using blood samples, but again, the bodies were pretty heavily damaged, and they didn't know if they would be able to get enough blood to run these tests. The pathologist they had working this case, though, was able, with some effort, to find enough intact blood vessels in both bodies to run the test. Rebecca's carbon monoxide level was in the range of what you would expect, given she was a smoker, and Wanda's was pretty much zero. So they believed that after both women had been killed and their bodies dragged to the utility room, the fire was deliberately set. There was various debris on the bodies and also empty cans of deck stain. They found stains on the bodies consistent with the color of the stain, and so it's believed that was the accelerant used. The killer probably thought the whole house would go up in flames, given that it was an old, small wood frame home, and the bodies were next to an oil furnace. But the basement was cement. So for the fire to consume the house, the flames would have had to have been tall enough to reach the ceiling, which they weren't. And surprising to even the fire investigators, the flames never even reached the furnace. Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, and if you are a true crime fan, this one is seriously for you. Newspapers.com is a massive archive of historical newspapers, and it is a gold mine when you're digging into real cases. I decided to see how far I could push this, so I looked up Jack the Ripper and read reporting about the Dear Boss letter in an article from 1888. I read a story about a man who put soot on his face and stood in the street yelling that he was Jack the Ripper, and he was arrested and questioned. So then I decided let's go a little on theme for July, and I looked up George Washington in the year 1776 and read the contemporary reporting of the American Revolution. But let's go ahead and bring it a little more current but still historical. What about the 1947 coverage of the Black Dahlia murder or the 1977 arrest of the Son of Sam? It's all there in newspapers.com. Cold cases, sensational trials, missing persons. You can follow a case through the headlines exactly as the public experienced it. We're not getting retroactive spin. You are getting the details that never even made it into books or podcasts. So whether you're a researcher or even a true crime podcaster yourself, or maybe someone who just can't get enough of these details, newspapers.com gives you access to history that most people don't even know is out there. Start exploring at newspapers.com/truecrime and use the promo code Crimelines for 20% off your subscription. Because the best primary source is always the one printed the morning after. What is in the way of starting that business you've always dreamed of? Probably the fact that it feels like a big deal, and that's because it is. But Shopify makes it simpler because they have the tools you need from day one. I'm sure you already have an image in your head of what you want your branding and website to look like, but you might not know how to execute that. We don't all know how to code a website. Luckily, Shopify's templates and AI tools get you a beautiful site up and running fast. I have to say, as an avid online shopper who loves convenience, I can say one thing I really love about Shopify sites is that my info is stored. So if I see that Shopify button even on a website I've never been to before, it doesn't matter that my wallet is in the other room. So when I look at that from a business point of view, just think about that type of optimized checkout at launch, getting more people to click the buy button. Now, I know the tech side of things can still feel overwhelming, so Shopify also has a built-in AI assistant sidekick ready to help if any questions come up. So you're not just clicking and praying your way through building your website, and you can spend that clicking and praying time actually working on growing your business. Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to small businesses just getting started. So why not you? All you need is the idea. Shopify handles the rest. Start your free trial at shopify.com/crimelines. Start your free trial at shopify.com/crimelines. That's shopify.com/crimelines. After killing the women, and presumably before lighting the fire, someone had rifled through Wanda's things. Her jewelry box had been emptied onto her bed, and in the spare room, the same thing was done with her purse. Any cash she had in her wallet was gone, and so were her cards and driver's license. As for who may have targeted Rebecca and/or Wanda, Melissa was able to give the police two names. One was a drug dealer who had threatened not just Rebecca's life, but also Wanda's and one of Melissa's brothers. And speaking of brothers, Melissa also said that one of her brothers was another possibility. He also had a drug problem, and he had previously stolen Wanda's insulin syringes from her house. However, both of these people had strong alibis. Melissa's brother was at work with a computerized time card backing him up, and the drug dealer was in county lockup. The police were working through their other tips when on December 27th, they got a call from a server at a local diner that his coworker might know something. He told the police that 28-year-old Amy Coral had been bragging that her boyfriend had pulled off a big crime. Around the same time that tip came in, the investigators learned that someone tried to make a Western Union transfer from Wanda's account on the night of December 21st, the same day the women were killed. The person Wanda supposedly wanted to send the money to was Amy Coral. Amy's name came up twice in about 24 hours, so they went out to Amy's house to question her. She eventually gave a full statement denying involvement in the murders, but knowing who was involved. Amy named her boyfriend 25-year-old Jermaine McKinney, but she also knew about two other women who were there. One of them was named Jazz, but Amy did not know her last name or even if Jazz was short for Jasmine or if it was a street name. The investigators pretty quickly figured out that Jazz was 21-year-old Jasmine McIver, who was a friend of Rebecca's who lived in the same apartment complex as she did. Jazz told the police, like Amy, that she wasn't involved in any murders, but she knew who did it. And she said it was a guy she knew as Maniac, which was Jermaine McKinney's street name. The other woman involved, according to Amy and Jazz, turned out to be 20-year-old Kiata Riley. This was verified through an independent tip that Kiata had told people she was involved, and she was even seen driving Jermaine's car in the days after the murders. When the police talked to Kiata, she also said she didn't participate in the actual murders, but she knew who did. And she named Jermaine, and she also said Jasmine was there. None of these three women, Amy, Kiata, and Jasmine, knew each other before the night of the murders, but they all knew the man they said was at the center of this, and they all, eventually, gave their full accounts of what they witnessed that night. I have taken the three different narratives as laid out in a legal document and blended them together so we can walk through the timeline from all perspectives in one go. To be as accurate as possible, I will follow pretty closely what they said as it was written in the legal document I have. According to Kiata, on December 19th, 2 days before the murders, Jermaine told her that he planned to rob Wanda Rollyson, believing she had a lot of money. The only way he would have gotten this impression would have been from Rebecca, who he had some type of relationship with. He told Kiata they would be able to get around $50,000, and if she helped, he would split it with her. So that night, the two drove out to Rebecca's apartment and picked her up. Rebecca gave Kiata the directions as they drove out to Wanda's house, getting there just after midnight on December 20th. Rebecca pointed out the house to them, and then they left. They dropped Rebecca back off at her apartment. The point of this drive was so that they would know where the house was, giving the impression Rebecca knew her mother was going to be targeted for a robbery, though Kiata later said maybe she didn't know, and we'll get into that later because that's an inconsistency in the story. After Kiata and Jermaine dropped Rebecca off, Kiata and Jermaine drove back out to Wanda's house, getting there around 2 a.m. Jermaine had a plan. Kiata was going to knock on the door and say that her car broke down and she needed to use the phone. Once the door was opened, Jermaine would rush in with pepper spray and then they'd tie Wanda up and rob her. But Wanda didn't answer the door that night, so they left. The following day, December 21st, Kiata and Jermaine decided to try again. Jermaine had a new plan. He was going to go out to the house with Rebecca, telling Rebecca that they were only going there to have sex while Wanda was at church. While at the house, Jermaine would tie up Rebecca, wait for Wanda to come home, tie up Wanda, and then steal Wanda's purse with her bank cards and ID in it. The first step in putting this plan into motion was to rope Jasmine into it. Jermaine had Kiata drive him to Jasmine's apartment. Jermaine then told Jasmine that Rebecca wanted to go to her mom's house because Rebecca owed Jermaine money. He said that Kiata was going to drop him and Rebecca off at Wanda's house, and then Kiata was going to return to Jasmine's apartment to wait until Jermaine was ready to be picked up. The reason he was roping Jasmine into this was that the car he had sold to Kiata that they were driving around in was noisy, and he wanted Jasmine to pick him up in her quieter running vehicle. Jasmine was basically going to be the getaway driver in the theft of Wanda's bank card. So we have Jermaine telling one person that he was going to trick Rebecca to go out to her mom's house, and he told someone else that Rebecca was going out there with him to steal the bank card to get the money she owed him. Two different stories here, and it's unclear which one is true because we don't have what we would call many reliable narrators here. So after this plan was put in place, Kiata and Jermaine picked Rebecca up and drove out to Wanda's house. When they got there, they noticed the lights were on, which made Rebecca nervous because she thought it meant Wanda had skipped going to church that night. So she went to the back door, realized her mom wasn't home, and she let herself in before unlocking the front door for Jermaine. Kiata then drove off a little after 7 p.m. Jasmine backs Kiata up on this, saying that she came to her apartment alone. Kiata said the plan was to wait at Jasmine's apartment until she got a phone call from Jermaine confirming he had tied Rebecca up. When she got that call, Jasmine and Kiata were supposed to start their drive out to the house. Kiata said that Jermaine called her at about 8 p.m. and said, "It is about to be 1, and then he hung up. He called back shortly after this and said 1, meaning Rebecca was tied up. Or at least that's what Kiata thought it meant. She insisted she had no idea Jermaine was going to kill anyone that night, just rob them. As planned, after this call, Jasmine and Kiata left the apartment and started heading to Wanda's house. On their way out there, Jermaine called Kiata again and said, "It's about to be 2. And, based on phone records, that call was at 8:46 p.m., which was right around the time Wanda would have pulled into the driveway after church. Around 9 p.m., Jasmine and Kiata arrived at the house. Kiata told Jasmine to park in the garage, but Wanda's car was there, so she pulled along the driveway to the side of the house. Shortly after getting there, Jermaine called them. According to phone records, it was 9:02 p.m., and he told Kiata to come inside, but to leave her phone in the car with Jasmine. Kiata said as she walked in through the back door, Jermaine said, "Be careful, they're right here." And Kiata assumed he meant the 2 women were tied up nearby. But when she stepped in, she saw Wanda on the floor and a huge puddle of blood around her. She said Jermaine said he shot her twice in the head. Jermaine handed Kiata Wanda's purse, and they went into a bedroom where they emptied it and took her license, bank card, and $93 in cash. While they were going through the purse, Kiata asked where Rebecca was, and Jermaine said she was in a room downstairs. Jermaine then asked Kiata to grab a blanket and a sheet, and then to look for something flammable. They looked around for a bit before Jermaine found what she thought was paint, but it was likely the deck stain. And Jermaine took all of these things downstairs, and though Kiata could see Jermaine drag Wanda into a room from where she was standing at the top of the stairs, she did not go down there to see what was going on. With Jermaine downstairs, Kiata called Jasmine from Jermaine's cell phone to say the club was about to burn. Jasmine had no idea what she was talking about and told her she needed to go home. Kiata told her she'd call her back in a minute, but it was quite some time before Kiata called again. She told Jasmine to go look to see if there was a button on the garage door to close it, and Jasmine said no. She was nervous about what was going on and didn't want to get out of the car. Not long after that call, Kiata and Jermaine left the house and got into the back seat of the car. Kiata spread out a blanket before they sat down, and when Jermaine got in, he had a clothes basket. Jasmine saw that in addition to clothes, there was what looked like maybe a blanket with a crowbar in the basket, and Jermaine had blood on his pants and boots. Jermaine also had a bunch of cigarette butts in his hand, and he said he hoped he got them all because he knew they could get DNA from any he left behind. He had learned about that on the TV show CSI. We talk about the CSI effect on juries where they want hard evidence and a forensic gotcha moment to bring the case together. But apparently this has also influenced criminals. The more they know, the more they can take forensic countermeasures. That's also why Jermaine had clothes in that basket with the crowbar. He said he and Rebecca did have sex before he killed her, and he took her clothing so that his hair and/or DNA wouldn't be found. As soon as they were all in the car at about 10 p.m., Jasmine drove off heading back towards her apartment. She asked Jermaine if he got the money, and he said no. Then he said, quote, "This is my first time." And then he followed that up with, "I took somebody's grandmother, somebody's mother away from them." Ready to get away from whatever happened in that house, Jasmine said she was going to go ahead and drop Jermaine and Kiata back off at their car. But Jermaine said no, she was going to drive them to Youngstown, Ohio instead. Jasmine told the police she did not want to be involved any longer, but when she looked into the back seat, she saw that Jermaine was holding a gun. Jermaine said they had to get to work figuring out a way to get Wanda's money out of her accounts because he left the bodies on fire near an oil furnace, and it would eventually blow up. Once the authorities were on the scene, they would cancel Wanda's cards and freeze her accounts. As they headed to Youngstown, according to Kiata, Jermaine was rambling about what he had done. He said he had sex with Rebecca, strangled her, and then hit her on the head with the crowbar. He said he had to shoot Wanda because she tried to scream. Jermaine was also, in this time, directing Jasmine along the drive because she had no idea where they were going, and he had her taking all back roads. From the car, he called his cousin and said he needed some clean pants and socks. So they stopped at the house long enough for Jermaine to get these things from his cousin, change, and then put his bloody clothes in the basket. Jermaine then directed them to a vacant house where he burned the clothing as well as some gloves that Kiata had brought for what she said she thought was just a robbery. Then they drove out to a large lake where Jermaine wanted to dispose of the evidence that couldn't burn easily, like his work boots and the crowbar. But remember how I mentioned that Melissa saw footprints in the snow at her grandmother's house? That's because it was freezing. Mr. CSI didn't account for the fact that the lake would be frozen over. So he threw the stuff off the bridge and watched as it landed on the surface. Jermaine got mad, but there wasn't much he could do about it. They drove away from the lake, and Jermaine said that his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Amy, would do the transfer from Wanda's account for them. She was pregnant with his child and madly in love with him. She even had a tattoo of his name on her. And according to Jermaine, she would do anything he wanted. Using Wanda's account information, Kiata checked the balance and learned that the account had $10,000 in it. So Jermaine called Amy at her job and told her that he had $10,000 and he wanted to marry her. If she wanted that, she had to leave work right away and meet him at her house. Amy agreed. And as Jasmine, Kiata, and Jermaine drove out to Amy's house, Jermaine said that if Amy got this wire transfer done for him, he was going to have to kill her too. I have to say, if I was driving around with a guy who just killed 2 people and was talking about eliminating witnesses, including the woman pregnant with his child, I would start to assume I was in danger. And Jermaine had a gun, so I can understand why Jasmine and Kiata didn't feel like they could necessarily leave at this point. But The two also stayed in contact with Jermaine even after this night, so it's hard to give them too much grace. What is in the way of starting that business you've always dreamed of? Probably the fact that it feels like a big deal, and that's because it is. But Shopify makes it simpler because they have the tools you need from day one. I'm sure you already have an image in your head of what you want your branding and website to look like, but you might not know how to execute that. We don't all know how to code a website. Luckily, Shopify's templates and AI tools get you a beautiful site up and running fast. I have to say, as an avid online shopper who loves convenience, I can say one thing I really love about Shopify sites is that my info is stored. So if I see that Shopify button even on a website I've never been to before, it doesn't matter that my wallet is in the other room. So when I look at that from a business point of view, just think about that type of optimized checkout at launch, getting more people to click the buy button. Now, I know the tech side of things can still feel overwhelming, so Shopify also has a built-in AI assistant sidekick ready to help if any questions come up. So you're not just clicking and praying your way through building your website, and you can spend that clicking and praying time actually working on growing your business. Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to small businesses just getting started. So why not you? All you need is the idea. Shopify handles the rest. Start your free trial at shopify.com/crimelines. Start your free trial at shopify.com/crimelines. That's shopify.com/crimelines.
Hi, this is Alex Kantrowitz. I'm the host of Big Technology Podcast, a longtime reporter, and an on-air contributor to CNBC. And if you're like me, you're trying to figure out how artificial intelligence is changing the business world and our lives. So each week on Big Technology, I host key actors from the companies building AI tech and outsiders trying to influence it, asking where this is all going. Places like Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon. So if you want to be smart with your wallet, your career choices, and at dinner parties, listen to Big Technology Podcast in your podcast app of choice.
When the three of them got to Amy's house, Jermaine called her and told her to come out to the car. In spite of Amy thinking they were running off to get married, he told her not to bother bringing a change of clothes, but to bring her ID. Amy went out to the car and saw that Jermaine wasn't alone. He was with two women she didn't know. But Jermaine again promised to marry her if she would help him with a wire transfer so he could get the money that he supposedly had access to. Amy claimed that she was told she was accepting a wire transfer in her name from Kiata's account. She said she was not told at this point about the murders. Regardless, Kiata called Western Union using Wanda's cell phone and said she wanted to transfer $9,700 from her account to Amy's. She had Wanda's bank card as well as Wanda and Amy's IDs, so she thought she had all the documents the agent would ask for. But the agent put her on hold, and it sounds like she thought something was suspicious because the agent got back on the line and said she couldn't make the transfer. She said she spoke with the cardholder who did not authorize it. Either Kiata or Jermaine blurted out that she could not have spoken to the cardholder. Now everyone got nervous at this admission, so Kiata abruptly hung up. While it is true Western Union did not talk to Wanda, the agent had called her home phone and left a message on the answering machine. And if Wanda had a personalized outgoing message, the agent would have noticed the voices didn't match. Jermaine said at that point he wanted to go to his father's house and he told Jasmine to drive him out there. So it was Jermaine, Kiata, Jasmine, and Amy in the car. As Jasmine drove, Jermaine started praying, saying, "Forgive me for my sins, for they're tremendous. Please watch over the families of everyone in this car." When they got to Jermaine's father's house, Amy and Kiata waited in the car while Jermaine and Jasmine went inside. Jermaine told his father he needed to borrow his car, but his father noticed that he was acting agitated and he had blood on his hands, so he told him no. Jermaine washed his hands, and as he did, he confessed again to Jasmine as to what happened. He said that he was able to tie Rebecca up as part of sex, which then left her completely unable to protect herself when he attacked. He said he killed her because she wouldn't give him the money. And then he said he waited on Wanda to come home and he pushed her down the stairs and she hit her head. He told Jasmine then to go get the other women from the car and have them come inside. After they were there for a bit, he asked his father if he would drive Amy home. But before they left, Jermaine pulled Amy aside and for the first time told her he had killed 2 people, that he had burned their bodies beyond recognition, but he thought he would be okay because of the lack of evidence. He said that if they were identified, he would be in trouble and she should just watch the news for any updates. He also told her he had washed his hands with bleach to get the blood off of them, but he wondered if it would still be visible under UV lights because, again, too much CSI viewing. After Amy left with Jermaine's dad, the other 3 left in Jasmine's car. They headed to a self-serve car wash to get rid of any evidence in the back seat. On the way there, Jermaine used a cigarette lighter to burn Wanda's card and ID before he threw the remains out the window. Jermaine then cleaned the car and they headed back towards Jasmine's apartment, but Jermaine realized he had missed some blood, so they stopped at another family's house to get more cleaning supplies. And then finally, they drove back to Jasmine's apartment, where Jermaine gave Jasmine some money. Kiata and Jermaine left in her car, and Jermaine also gave Kiata some cash. Not everything the women told the police about what happened that night could be verified, but some of it could be. Like Jermaine throwing the evidence on the frozen lake. It turned out those items had already been found. A news reporter was near the lake on December 23rd doing a spot with her cameraman, and while there, someone told them they should look over the bridge. So they did. And they saw a pair of bloody work boots and what looked like a bloody towel with a crowbar poking out from under it. They called the police, who then took this into evidence. It would take until December 28th and 29th for these items to be connected to Wanda and Rebecca's murders because of Kiata and Jasmine's statements. All 4 of the people involved in the robbery and/or murders would be charged, and 3 would make plea deals. Amy was charged with complicity for receiving stolen property, attempted theft from an elderly person, and identity fraud against an elderly person. Kiata and Jasmine were charged with complicity to aggravated robbery, aggravated burglary, and kidnapping. All 3 pleaded guilty, and their sentencing deals were dependent on them testifying against Jermaine McKinney at trial, which they did. Amy ended up getting 5 years of probation, Jasmine got 5 years in prison, and Kiata got 6 years. But they wouldn't be handed these sentences until after they testified in court, and that meant the police had to arrest Jermaine, and he did not make that easy on them. Jermaine had a feeling the police were closing in. On December 29th, 2005, he told Jasmine that Amy had called him, and she was trying to get him to talk about the murders on the phone, and he thought it must be a recorded line that the police set up. He hung up on her, and then later Kiata called him and left him a message saying, "They got me." Jermaine told Jasmine that this was going to end in a police standoff, and he wanted to make the police shoot him. And the first part, the standoff, did happen. The police sent out a bolo for Jermaine on January 1st, 2006. That same day, officers in Youngstown were called out to a residential street for a suspicious vehicle. While they were there, a neighbor pointed out a house that they believed Jermaine was holed up in. As a detective walked by the house, she heard a gunshot and she called in backup. She heard someone yell out, "I have hostages, I will kill them," and then 2 more shots were fired. The detective and her partner took cover behind a tree, and every time they tried to get from the tree to their cruiser, Jermaine would fire at them again. A hostage negotiator and dozens of officers came to the scene, and the negotiator was able to get Jermaine on his cell phone, and Jermaine demanded to see his children. He was told there was a warrant for him, and he said he had a woman in the house tied up and that he was going to set the house on fire before coming outside with his gun drawn so that the officers would shoot him. Jermaine's phone then went dead, so they started talking to him using a PA system. After 3 hours and sporadic gunfire from Jermaine, he ran out of bullets, and then he decided to just come out without his guns, and he was arrested. Jermaine was then charged in 2 separate cases. He was charged with firing on officers, and he was also charged with the aggravated murders of Rebecca and Wanda, with the aggravating circumstances being multiple murders, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, kidnapping, and aggravated arson. In addition to the testimony of his co-conspirators, the state also had DNA evidence. Jermaine left behind more than he thought. That one cigarette butt that he missed near the furnace room had his DNA on it, and it was a 1 in 57 quintillion match. The blood on the crowbar from the lake was Wanda's. A stain on the right work boot was a mixture of Wanda and Rebecca's blood, and the left boot also had a mixture of their DNA on the outside. But the major contributor of the DNA on the inside of the boot was Jermaine McKinney. He was wearing those boots. But Jermaine was going to defend himself. First, he tried to do it outside of court. He got some letters to Amy through a friend, and in them, Jermaine wrote out a letter that he wanted Amy to copy in her own handwriting and then send it out to the media. This letter was claiming that Amy's cousin was the actual culprit. Jermaine said if Amy did it, he would give her $10,000, and if she didn't do it, he might get the death penalty. Amy did not do what he asked and continued to cooperate with the state. So, at the trial in October of 2006, Jermaine McKinney's defense tried another tactic. It was impossible to deny with the DNA evidence that he was at the scene. But who says he was the one who killed the women? Only Kiata was in the house with him. So she made the best reasonable alternative suspect. So the defense really slammed her on cross-examination. They brought up every statement she made to the police regarding this case and highlighted every inconsistency. They brought up her criminal history in another state. They confronted her about a letter she wrote to her child's father saying that she killed before and she would do it again. They asked about guns she owned, previous knife fights, and how she financially supported herself. And the answer was from men giving her money. They used anything they had to discredit Kiata and make her look bad in front of the jury, because they wanted the jury to agree that it was reasonable to believe that Kiata was the actual killer. But the jury didn't agree. They found Jermaine McKinney guilty on most counts. They found him guilty for the murders, but then they didn't find him guilty of kidnapping Wanda. They did find enough of the aggravating circumstances that at sentencing, the death penalty was still on the table. And they could have given him 3 possible sentences: death, life without parole, or life with parole eligibility in 25 to 30 years. Jermaine did not testify at trial, but he did speak at his sentencing. He said that he had initially wanted to skip going to trial entirely and not bother to present any mitigating factors, but he only went ahead with everything because one of his attorneys, who was a mitigation specialist, encouraged him. But he felt like it didn't matter because sending him to prison away from his children for even 25 or 30 years was really just a slow death sentence. But his attorneys did ask the jury to give Jermaine a second chance, in part because of those children who they said he was a good father to. The defense also brought up Jermaine's childhood, with family members testifying how he grew up neglected as his mother was addicted to crack. But in his own testimony, while Jermaine did concede he grew up in what he characterized as a crack house, He said he didn't think it had anything to do with the situation he was in. The state agreed with Jermaine, saying his childhood was not enough of a mitigating factor. They told the jury that Jermaine had other choices he could have made, including leaving Wanda's house rather than lying in wait, waiting for her to come home. And they scoffed at the assertion that Jermaine was a good father, pointing out that he never paid any child support for his 5 children. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before recommending life without parole. In Ohio, the judge makes the final sentencing decision, but unless a jury recommends the death penalty, it's off the table. So the judge could follow the recommendation and sentence Jermaine to life without parole, or he could give him a chance at parole one day. In the end, the judge went with the jury's recommendation, and Jermaine McKinney was given 2 life without parole sentences plus various years for the other charges. And then Jermaine faced his second case, the 14 counts of felonious assault against a peace officer for the standoff at the time of his arrest. He pleaded guilty to 7 counts, with the other 7 being dropped, and this added more years to his sentence, which really didn't mean very much because he was never going to get out of prison, barring a successful appeal, which he didn't get. His first failed appeal was in 2008, and the ruling was interesting because the judges kept pointing out that Jermaine made claims like saying the state called him a, quote, maniac, but he never pointed out in the trial transcript where those things supposedly happened. So they had to look through to find all of these claims, which is not a good look for an appeal. You need to make it as easy on those judges as possible. And for the record, they could not find where the state called him a maniac. Maniac was Jermaine's street name, and the appellate court ruled that it came up because he chose to use that name himself. And if he didn't want that name to be mentioned at trial, he shouldn't have gone by it. Another thing I think was interesting in the appeal was that Jermaine argued that the jury should have been instructed that they could find him guilty of just robbery rather than aggravated robbery, and one reason he gave was because he didn't steal anything until after the women were already dead. So he didn't use a weapon or force to rob them of their things. But apparently someone else already tried that argument, because the Ohio Supreme Court already had a ruling on the books about this type of argument. Just because the physical force ended right before the robbery, because the victim was dead, didn't make it not an aggravated robbery. Jermaine kept trying to appeal, but according to the Trumbull County court records and the Ohio Supreme Court, this didn't go anywhere. The Ohio Supreme Court rejected jurisdiction entirely. Without new evidence, Jermaine was not going to get this case looked at again. So he attempted to get new evidence in a way that made it very clear this man is dangerous. On October 18th, 2015, Jermaine was in the prison library at around 10:30 a.m. when one of the 2 guards stepped out of the room. That's when Jermaine took the other guard, a woman, hostage and began making demands. We know what the demands were because he called a news station in the middle of this situation to tell them what they were. He said he wanted to talk with Jasmine, his mother, another relative, one of his attorneys, and 2 of the investigators on the case. He said he wanted to ask them all 10 questions each, and once he had that opportunity and got his answers, he would come out peacefully and release his hostage. We don't know what those questions would have been, but I have to assume he knew it was the end of the road with his appeals, and he had some idea that he would get what he needed for a habeas petition if he could get some answers. The situation was resolved around 10 p.m. that same day, with the corrections officer being released, but not unharmed. Over those more than 11 hours, Jermaine threatened to rape her. He physically assaulted her, and she told the court that he non-fatally strangled her to the point she almost passed out. So instead of getting grounds for another appeal, Jermaine was charged with kidnapping, felonious assault, and assault on a corrections officer. And these charges came with a sentencing enhancement since he was a repeat violent offender. he ended up with another 22 years added to his sentence. As of the publishing of this episode, Jermaine McKinney is still incarcerated at the age of 46. And before I end this episode, I want to shift a little bit to an adjacent topic. I want to very quickly share my experience, strength, and hope. As the loved one of an addict, you can get better. You cannot make them better, but you can make yourself better. You can find your healthy boundaries, you can build the skills you need, and you don't have to carry this alone. I personally found 12-step work helpful in my early 20s because other people's stories of how they dealt with specific situations made me really evaluate how I was handling similar things. It's where I saw real-life examples of codependency and how people broke out of that. So whether it's through a group like Families of Addicts or Al-Anon, or individual work with a therapist, or a family group session at a treatment center, this isn't something you have to deal with alone. And a big part of living with someone else's addiction in your life is learning how to take care of yourself. Resources will be listed in the show notes.